Hello! In this video, I'm going to introduce you to OBS profiles, scenes, sources, scene collections, and transitions. With a combination of scenes and sources in particular, you will start to understand why these are your most powerful tools within OBS. My name is Gerd Christandl. I'm an online educator and learning technologist at the University of Greenwich, London, UK. I share tips and how-tos to help you build your digital skills for your online and hybrid teaching needs. If you want to stay in the loop, hit that subscribe button below and turn on notifications to avoid missing out. Cheers! In my last video, I have shown you where to find OBS, how to download it, and to check your system's specifications against the system requirements as set out by OBS. Today, we're gonna actually populate OBS. So we have not added anything to OBS yet. We will look at profiles, scenes, sources, scene collections, and transitions today. That will create your first infrastructure of OBS, the screen composition and interplay between the screen components. Let's start off with the profile. For that, let's switch over to OBS. Here it is. And today we're going to have a look at the profiles first. So when you look here on the top of the screen, you can see that right here, it says your profile and scenes. Both are currently untitled. So in brief, what is a profile? Profiles save your system settings. Now let's assume you want to use OBS eventually for as a virtual camera for Teams. You want to use it for recordings, and maybe you want to start streaming to YouTube or to other video platforms like Twitch. For that, you need different system settings, maybe different camera resolution. So last week we decided for an output resolution of 1920 by 1080. Now for using a virtual camera maybe into Teams, you might want to scale it down, because if the video quality is not getting through Teams, then Teams is the bottleneck, and it doesn't make much sense to have a very high resolution there. So you but you want to have a high resolution output when you do recordings. So you don't have to go back and forth between the settings at all times. You can choose different profiles to do that. Yeah, one profile can be for use for virtual camera or MS Teams. Another profile might be for recording. And let's say I want to create a new profile. Let's do that, and let's call this one streaming to MS Teams, for instance. Yeah, and I would leave this box here set or ticked by default, because then the auto configuration wizard pops up. What's that? We have encountered this auto configuration wizard in our last video. This was after the installation has finished and before you actually get to the OBS surface proper. And here you can pick a different main reason for the profile. So eventually you might have two different profiles if you choose to use OBS in your online teaching. One for recording, optimized for recording, and the other one optimized for delivery, live delivery. Yeah. And then you can just switch back and forth. So let's say we're gonna use one for, let's say, recording. And it says here's a couple of settings here. I leave those settings at this point. We're not gonna go back into settings here. Let's say that's okay. I apply the settings, and then you see the profile here, the profile name up here on top changes to streaming to MS Teams. And then if you just want to switch back to my initial profile, I just go here to profile in the menu bar and then click on OBS in HE, in high location, and back to my initial settings. It's very useful because then you don't need to go back and forth. We all have very similar thoughts on that. Once we found settings that work, we don't even want to go back in there because we don't want to mess them up. Next up, what is a scene? Scenes together with sources are the meat to the OBS bones, basically. They determine your screen layout, your screen composition, what you want to show on screen to your audience, to your students. Anything you want, that you want to output. And let's have a look at what we can do with scenes. At this point, you won't see much on the screen itself. I'm going to zoom in here. There's already a default scene here that is an empty scene. You can see that the scene has the name scene, very creatively put. Yeah, and then there are currently no sources selected for that scene. So that's why you don't see anything here. So you right click on the scene here, menu list pops up, context sensitive, and then you can just click on rename, just similar to what we did earlier with the profiles, and then you give that scene a new name. Let's call this first scene. Let's create a second scene. For that, you go to the scenes box, you find the plus sign here on the bottom, you click that plus sign, and then let's call it, probably guessed it, second scene. Right, now a second scene has been created, and you can switch back between those scenes just like that. Let's create another scene, third scene. This is how you create a scene. What if you want to get rid of a scene again? You probably guessed it already. If I'm going here, for instance, on third scene, and I decided actually I don't want to bloat the number of scenes, that's a scene I don't need, then you just go ahead, click on it, and then you can click on the minus button here on bottom, minus, and then it says, are you sure you wish to remove name of your scene? It says yes, and then it's gone. One thing that is new in OBS version 27, if you ever worked with previous versions, you can undo such things now as well. Yeah, there was no undo button before, so you can go up here on edit, and you could click undo, delete the third scene. So let's do that. What if I want to change the sequence of my scenes? Yeah, so you might have eventually, let's say, a starting screen and an intermission screen. And when you have your basic scenes, like the 3 scenes that we're creating, main screen, shared content screen, and overhead cam screen, that's the 3 ones that we're eventually going for. Then, if you want to create new scenes to that, they will be added on the bottom of it. Let's actually create a scene called session starting soon, something like that. And you would want it as the first scene, actually, just for better manageability. So all you need to do is actually just click on it, hold the mouse button down. That's one way of doing it. And then you just move it up. Or move it back down. Yeah. In our case, I'm just going to go ahead and delete it. Yeah. So very simple. Now we know how to add a scene, delete a scene, change the sequence of scenes. Yeah. The one thing that is important to note here is that scene names are global. What does that mean? It means that you cannot give the same name that you use for a scene also to a source. Yeah, that you cannot name 2 scenes in the same profile with the same name. That's probably logical. But if you give a source the same name as a scene, so if I was to create a source here called first scene, then I'm actually creating a conflict. So that's the scenes at this point. Yeah, so the scenes are already, of course, important, but you want to populate your screen. You want to show something to your audience. And that's what we have the sources for. So there's various source types that we have available. And let's get through the source types that are coming pre-installed with the base OBS installation. So without further ado, let's have a look. For that purpose, I have created a scene collection. As you can see here, you can address the scene collections by going to scene collections in the menu bar. And here I have created a collection of scenes that will highlight the features of sources and the source types that we have available in the base. So we have audio sources, input and output, for capturing all types of audio. We have browser sources, color source, display capture, We're not going to cover the game capture because that is mainly for streaming of video games, and that is not really in the scope of this video series. That is targeted at higher education, online teaching and recording. Image and image slideshow are two further very useful source types. Media source. Scenes can be sources themselves. We're going to have a look at that too. Text will be featured throughout. The VLC video source is a source type that you will most likely not find in your source type list of your OBS installation unless you have the VLC video player installed on your system, but we are not covering it as default. Then video capture devices, in short, this is where the webcams go, and then the window capture. To highlight also how to add a source, I left the first scene blank, so I have a scene here, or scenes created here for the source types that we just listed. So the audio sources are the first ones. So currently the audio sources are selected, and you can see that in my sources box there is nothing. There's no source selected, the canvas is entirely blank. To add a source, very similar to the scenes earlier, you click on the Add button. In this case, we are selecting the audio input capture. Now, for audio input capture, it allows you to add audio input devices. The symbol kind of gives it away. This will be your microphones. So we have here the option to actually address different audio inputs devices that you may have installed on your system. That may be a built-in microphone, that may be an external microphone, as I have it myself. That might be the microphone of a headset. You can have all of these plugged into your system and address them individually. So very useful if you want to play around with audio a little bit here. You can create here a new one. There is none pre-created, so to speak. You can give it any name, and I would suggest eventually you give it a descriptive name, so when you see the name of the source, you know what source type it is and what it does. In this case, I just leave it as is, click OK, and then I select microphone, whatever type of microphone you have. So your list here, your drop-down list, will definitely look different to mine. You would select that, click OK, and you see that because we have added an audio input capture device, that the audio mixer has now a scale here. We will deal more with audio input capture devices when we're setting up the microphones in a separate video. The other audio source type is audio output capture. When would you use audio output capture? Basically anything that can be captured that is outputted in terms of sound from your system can be captured and used in OBS. The standard is usually the desktop audio. So for instance, if you're playing a video on YouTube to your students, you might have noticed in Teams it's a bit tricky to do, that you have your voice and an audio capture there. But what you would need to kind of feed that into your teaching, a YouTube video or any kind of system sound, is desktop audio. So this is what you would capture in that case. You could name it then desktop audio. I leave it as is, click OK, and there is a default output device defined in your system that would relegate to what default is. If I click my list here, again, this will differ to your list. Is probably, I could, for instance, capture what my speakers output. That would be my desktop audio. I could capture what my specific headphones output. I also have my in-ear headphones. They're right there. So I could select anything that system side outputs sounds and capture it in OBS. For the demonstration purposes now, I leave this on default, and you'll see that this is also now added to the audio mixer. You might have noticed I have no specific scene for the text. This is because I have added text to every scene, and I'll show you how to add text as a source type. I click on Add, I click on Text, And you can create a title for that text. You see that I have here already a list of text, so I could select any of these pre-created texts, but I want a new one here, and I name this audio source types because I have two different source types in there. And I can change by clicking on select font in the properties window. Properties window typically opens after you create a new source. And I select any kind of font that I find useful. I have the fonts that are installed on my computer are being displayed to me. And I can also change the font style, so bold, italic, light, etc. I want this in a different size. And then you can click OK. And I move this here in the middle because there's nothing really to display in these source types. So these were the audio input captures. So now let's move to this next one in the list. As you can see, if you look at the list, that's the browser. So I have created a scene with a browser. You might want to call up or want to create a scene for your students, maybe to discuss some news using, I don't know, The Economist, Financial Times, or in this case, I've selected the BBC website. And it's not just that you can display a browser window. You can do this with a screen display, no problem. Or you're just sharing your desktop and call up a browser window. What you can do here is, though, you can actually interact with the browser via OBS. This is an inbuilt browser in OBS. How would you do that? You would need to go ahead and right-click on the source that you added, the browser. And if it's a browser source type, it has the command interact in it. What it does is it opens a new browser window. It's a bit small, but I can make this larger. And if I just move this now off screen, so you see the browser window in OBS, I can now interact in there. So for instance, I could just click on a link. So let's select a headline, and you can see, so I selected the headline in the browser window that I moved off screen, and you see that it's displayed also in OBS. So you can call up, you can predefine a website you want to use for sure in a specific scene. You can put yourself as a talking head in the corner. You can call this up, call up an article or a headline, and maybe use this for a discussion with the students. Very useful. I mean, of course, it's a limited browser interaction, so it does not give the full features of Chrome or Microsoft Edge or Firefox, but it's very, very useful in order to prepare something like that. And you just close it like this. The next source type is color source type. What that does is it adds a rectangle. And that you can color this rectangle either with one solid color or with other types of colors. You can see that here. And you can see what I did here at this point also demonstrate another feature that you can do on these source types, especially when they're displaying ones, is that it typically shows in a specific size. Yeah, and that size might not extend to the entire canvas that you have provided. So you see that there's a big chunk of black background here that is not being filled. What if I want to expand the source so it actually fits the screen? Nothing easier than that. All you need to do is you go to the source type, right click, then you look for the menu transform, and in that menu you're looking for something called fit to screen. If you're a user of keyboard shortcuts and Windows system, Control F. Click on that, and then it automatically fits it to the canvas size. Also very useful feature. You can see this is a solid green color. If you wanted to change that, you have two ways of doing that. Either you would go and right click properties and change the color here, or in this case you select the source, and then up here the main window it says select color. It opens the color palette immediately, and I could change this to, let's say, dark blue, and there's that. Yeah, very quickly done. You might want to use that for a background. So if you were to use a green screen, you could just, be in front of a solid colored background. Let's move on to the image source types, plural, because there's two of them. You can see that the first one here on top, is just a mere image. Yeah, an image source type that you would select, upload from your system. In this case, it is the image from my channel, my YouTube channel. You can see that right here. I can select any image here, and if we look at the properties of that particular image, you can see that I can do a lot, but what I want to show is the command here. But you would select the file path, the command unload image when not showing. That would save a little bit of system resources, because when you move from that scene to a different scene, it unloads the image, and when you move back, it loads the image again. The other source type that you would add again by add, in this case image slideshow, it's this. It's an image slideshow, and you can select an entire folder full of images that you want to use in a slideshow, or you select individual images if you want. The properties here have a few more things that you can set. So for instance, always play when not visible. That means if you have like 15, 20 images in a slideshow and you move to a different scene, they keep on running in the background. That means when you left at the second image to a different scene and you return, you will not see the third image next. Yeah, so you would see one down the line depending on how long you were in the other scene. You can change that behavior if you want. So for instance, you can say, I want this to stop. So if I stop the scene and it is on the fifth image in the image slideshow, I return, then it continues with the sixth image. Or you pause it, yeah, so it continues where you left off. The slide mode here is automatic. You can change this to hotkeys, so you actually give the command on your keyboard. You can also change the transition. We'll look at transitions a little bit later in a little bit more detail, but you can change the type of transition. You can say, all right, I don't want it faded, I want it swiped, like this. And you can also change the time between the transmission, so how long is each image visible. And you can also change the transition speed. These are stated in milliseconds, so be careful not to change that to something very low, because that will be very fast. Yeah, my recommendation is click it on loop, because then it just continues in the background. Yeah, so you need to load it again and again. So these are the image source types. The next source type is a media source type. Now, media source type, very useful. Here you can display or play in general video files and audio files. So video files that have a file format such as MP4 or MKV, or audio files that have MP3 format or WAV format. And there's also other supported file formats. Going to properties, you can see the settings that you have available, such as also looping the video. So play the video once, or do you want to have it repeated, such as I do here. Do you want to reset the playback when the source becomes active? So you move away from that scene with the video, you move back to the scene. Does it start from the beginning, or does it start where you left off? There is one setting I recommend if you have it available. In the last video we talked about hardware encoding, what that is, what it does. If you have it, always select it, because it makes things smoother, less laggy, less prone to issues in general. Show nothing when the playback ends. So when the playback ends, when the video ends, should the source disappear or not. And you can also, of course, change the speed. So this video is in slow-mo, so if you want to speed it up a bit, and of course you can make it slower if you want. So all the while, you can see that on every scene here, I have a text source as well to indicate that. The next one is a scene as a source type. Now that's interesting, and we will use that feature in the next video when we're setting up the webcams for our 3-scene setup. You can see here, this is a scene I created earlier. It's the scene with the images. Yeah, so if I switch back to that scene, this is the entire scene here. If I go to the scene source type, you can see that I have included that scene, and it plays out as it would in its proprietary form. But this here is a movable source that I can, as you can see here, make smaller by grabbing this handle. Yeah, the active source, you probably noticed that, is always bordered with a red frame. You can make it larger. I can treat it like any other source. I can crop it. How do you crop? Yeah, you would hold down the Alt key on your Windows keyboard. Keep it down, keep it pressed, and then you go to one of the side handles here, and then you move that handle. You see that this side is turning green. It indicates it's cropping. So I could crop that part and that part only, and just use that for another scene. Yeah, I can undo that or just change the crop. So this is very useful, and we're going to use that feature, as I said, in the webcam video. The next source type is a video capture source type. You can see that this is my overhead camera. So a video capture source type captures your webcam or webcams. It's also how you would be setting up multiple webcams very easily. And then you can transform the webcam as you want. So if I just demonstrate the transformation options here, they're very similar to all the other sources and their transformation availabilities. So in this case, what if I wanted to rotate this? I want to flip it horizontally and vertically and see what happens. And you can see that in this case, it looks as if somebody is looking over my shoulder directly. Yeah. Although the webcam is pointed the other way around in my case. Yeah, so very simple. And again, I can also transform this in different manners. I can crop this however I want, or transform it. Again, a text source type here as well. So last but definitely not least, a window capture source type. A window capture source type captures a specific window that is currently open on your system. Again, a highly useful feature if you want to demonstrate, let's say, a PowerPoint presentation, or in this case is an Excel spreadsheet. The nice thing is that this stays on. Yeah, this would be a big difference to a display capture. But the window capture and the display capture. Display capture, as you see later, the display capture captures whatever is being shown on a display. That means you can, of course, call up browser windows, you can call up applications, but basically they see everything that you do on that window. If you want to avoid that, you want to capture a specific application on a specific scene. So in this case, it could be for an Excel class or just a part of your class where you use Excel. You see it here on full display, but it's covered up by other windows on my actual screen. But I can still work with it. Yeah, so I can go ahead here. You see the cursor here, and I can start typing, for instance, ID, surname, first name, and so on. If I wanted to build up a sort of a kind of a database, it makes no difference if what I'm doing right now on the other screen is as follows. I'm actually restoring the window down. You can see that the source follows that. Yeah. That is something that would not be possible if you used the display capture. I can make it larger again, I can resize it directly, and the whole thing follows. So that's what the window capture source type does. Whatever you have on the main screen will be displayed using a display capture source type. I can demonstrate this too. If I move an application over here, let's grab the Excel window I had earlier, and if I move this into the screen here from the side, you see what happens here. It's right there. Yeah, so that is what happens on the main screen here. You see, we have a variety of source types available that will help us enormously in our work, in our ideas for a good screen composition. With add-ins and with other applications that link into OBS, they might even add additional source types. So for instance, in my main primary OBS instance, I have a source type that's called audio visualizer, where you can display audio bars that move with music that you link to them. It's a very interesting feature. I use this for starting screens and for intermission screens in my online teaching recordings. There's so many out there. It would be way beyond the scope of this video to cover them all. You might have noticed that there are also transitions between the scenes. So if I move from one scene to the next scene, this one fades slightly. So you see the fading here, right? How can we change that, or how can we modify that? Well, we have next to the audio mixer is another section called scene transitions. There you can change the type of transition. So for instance, if I want to have something different, let's say I want to have a cut, then this is going straight there directly without fading. The thing is that the settings here apply to OBS globally. So whatever you set here applies to all the transitions. We also have, so for instance, we have swipe. Let's call it swipe. You see, if you select those, you can preview the transition. It's a standard swipe. You can have a swipe in as well. You can change that. A indicates the original scene and B indicates the scene you're going to. So if we select that just to demonstrate that and I move the scene, you see how this works. And of course, you can also change the duration. It's a very quick swipe. So let's make this one a bit longer. Let's say 600 milliseconds. Let's see if that looks better. It's a bit slower. I want it even slower, so I'm doubling that to 1200 milliseconds. That should be much slower now. Whichever you want to use is your personal taste, but there is something called a stinger transition, and stinger transitions can be very creative, very, very powerful, very interesting to do. But these types of transitions, these let's call them advanced transitions, are more of a topic for an advanced video rather than a basic one. So for now, you pick your favorite. I leave it on fade. That's a bit of a slow fade now. It worked for the swipe, but let's do this on 600. Let's see if I move now. Now that's a nice fade. There you go. Yeah. So very similar to how you would do this in PowerPoint, if you use transitions, that is. Yeah, and that's basically it for this video. Yeah, so in this video you've seen profiles, what a profile is, scenes, how to add, delete, rearrange, manage scenes, and then we went through the source types that exist in the system. A brief introduction to those source types. That's the important bit to note at this point. Of course, you might want to know, okay, are we going more in detail into those source types? And yes, we will. Initially, for our basic video series, we will focus on very specific source types. We will, of course, always focus on audio and video. They are so important that they warrant separate videos. How to set up your audio and how to set up your video on your system. Then we also feature, of course, the browser, because we want to create some content on one of our scenes in the background. A display capture for applications, let's say a PowerPoint, for instance. An image or images. There will also be, of course, ample use of the text source type and the window capture. One feature that will also be very useful eventually that I have not shown you yet is that you can actually make sources invisible. You can hide them if you don't want to show them. As an example, select the image source types slideshow here. And what if I wanted to hide that slideshow? All I need to do is I go into the sources box, the sources section, and you see that next to each source, there's two symbols here. One symbol is an eye, yeah? And saying if you click on the eye, the source gets hidden. So you don't have to delete sources. You can have, for instance, several background images and just hide them. Yeah, you can switch them on and off for instance. To switch them back on, just click on the now crossed eye again. If I want my image here, I want my image to stay in that place, then I go ahead and I click on the lock here. So if I click on the lock, what I cannot do, as you can see, I can select all the other sources, I can move them around, but I cannot select that source here anymore. Even if I click on it in the sources section, it's not selectable, it's fixed in place. In order to remove that lock, I just click on the lock here again, and I can again move it wherever I want, resize, change, transform. And that's basically it for this video. So I hope you enjoyed this brief introduction on profiles, scenes, sources, and transitions. Don't worry, we'll go much more into detail, especially into settings of those source types that we are going to use in our setup. And now, over to you again. My question of the day. What scenes and sources do you want to set up? Which of them that we have seen today briefly do you think will have the most value to you initially? Which ones can you see maybe not using so much at the beginning, but more in the future the more acquainted you get with OBS? Please let me know in the comments below. Thank you. If you have any questions about anything I have mentioned or covered in this video, please also let me know in the comments. By the way, if you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell to not miss out on any new content I provide here on my channel. Thank you very much for watching, and as always, stay hungry for new skills. Bye!